back with the college football review with you. Yeah, right there. With you. Week number 3 in the books. We're giving our review of what happened this past weekend in college football. We may even give a little bit of a look into what may happen next week, but the lines haven't come out just yet. But we're going to talk about football nonetheless, especially this past weekend. I'm Trav, as you already know. Dimeskii will be in tow with me. Dimeskii in tow with me as we talk college football. And of course, let's get right to it. College football really started on Thursday, as it does almost all of the time during the college football season, the regular season that is. And it started off with Coach Prime. Coach Prime, Colorado, took their act to Houston. And what happened? Nothing that was good for Coach Prime and his crew. They freaking lost, and they lost pretty handily. Houston took care of them. But I think more importantly, Ryan Staub, young Ryan Staub, got the start in this game. And the reason why he probably did, because they did throw all 3 of their quarterbacks out last week against Delaware. He looked the best out of them. I think Coach Prime thought he had something special, at least for the meantime, even though he does have a 5-star true freshman on his team in Juju Lewis. But anyway, gives Ryan Staub the opportunity. He goes out and he bombs out. And he bombs out big. And I guess the experiment is not necessarily over. It's just that, I think at this point in the season, you shouldn't be testing out new quarterbacks, but Coach Prime has been known to do things differently. And this is just one of the things that he has done differently. Ryan Staub, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, obviously didn't help their cause. They lose by 16, 36-20. So they go down to the Houston Cougars. Any thoughts on Coach Prime this year?
Let me see about Coach Prime. They talking about giving him he's on the hot seat. That's what I'm hearing right here. You know what I mean? It was a lot of turnovers and time of possession. Colorado coughed it up a lot. 2 interceptions. They held the ball for like 23 minutes. Houston dominated the clock, holding the ball for like 36 minutes, 45 seconds.
Yep.
And Connor Wegman, it was his career night. Houston QB threw for 222 yards and he ran for 83, scoring on 2 rushing touchdowns. You know what I'm saying? Both career highs for him.
I think just as much. Last year, Coach Prime had a lot of those problems when he had Travis Hunter at wide receiver and cornerback, and he had his own son Shador at quarterback the entire time, just 2 years then, now 3 years with Colorado. And there were just certain things they couldn't do, like run the ball. They still didn't get over the 100-yard mark as a team, but they gave up over 200 yards on the ground. Man, there seems to be so many things wrong with Coach Prime's teams. You would think with his name and the flamboyancy and all of the Nick Saban commercials that kids right now, they're so enamored with things like that, you think that they'll be happy to play for him. Well, some of these players are happy to play for him. He's getting some of these players, but can he really coach now? It's a different story than being at Jackson State, where you're so much better than everybody else, but is it really an indictment as well? Because even at Jackson State, as dominant as he was, his team was so much better than the other teams, he still didn't win a Celebration Bowl the 2 years he was there. They lost twice. North Carolina Central beat them. They still couldn't beat South Carolina State. They couldn't win the Celebration Bowl. So there may be something said about how Coach Prime really coaches, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better because he seems to be in a hot seat right now. Let's sweep him away because we got about a half hour to kick this off. The next game, at least the one that I want to bring up, would be North Carolina State taking on Wake Forest. Now, Wake Forest isn't great. They're not like the Riley Skinner days, but I think they're pretty solid. But you don't really know right now. But in-state, that's the games. Those are the games that are really tough. The in-state rivalries. It's not even a rivalry. It's just that the players are more familiar with one another, even with the transfer portal. But when you take North Carolina State and you look at Wake Forest, there aren't too many other players that come from outside of the state of North Carolina. So there is that tougher game, tougher rivalry thing going on. And guess what? North Carolina State wins. They're 3-0 now. What's even worse, not for them, but worse, period, they're a 3-0 team that's not ranked in the top 25. But Notre Dame is 0-2 and still in the top 25. The coaches poll and the AP. what's going on here. You have an undefeated team, and you can say, well, maybe North Carolina State doesn't have enough clout. Well, that may be true, but guess who does have clout? Nebraska. They've won national championships. They've had All-Americans everywhere. They had the great Tom Osborne coaching them once upon a time, Heisman winners, all of that. They're 3-0. They're still not ranked. So where's the problem there? But anyway, North Carolina State wins the game against Wake Forest, and their quarterback, I know people will start talking about him a little bit more. C.J. Bain, a true sophomore quarterback. He was a true freshman last year and started. He's a true sophomore this year starting. 6'6", about 210 pounds. He's someone the NFL looks at as a prototype in terms of size, height, arm. Let's see how he continues to develop. He threw for 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, but just over 200 yards. And his running game wasn't exactly that pristine. But nevertheless, they were able to pull it off. And the reason why I even bring him up in that regard, because he was the quarterback in high school who used to pass to Jeremiah Smith, who now plays with Ohio State and who put up that phenomenal true freshman year at Ohio State last year. And in a lot of estimations, came into this season as the #1 player, period, in college football. And he also threw the ball to Joe Trader, wide receiver, #1 for the Miami Hurricanes. When he's healthy, that's the problem. He can't stay healthy, but he was still named the #1 quarterback, a true sophomore down there in Coral Gables. So those are the 2 games we're talking about out the box. Any thoughts on any of that?
Well, you called me out there, man. That I didn't even get to get any watch or pay any attention to North Carolina State.
It's not even paying attention to him. Do you have any thoughts on probably what I just mentioned in terms of them not being ranked in the top 25, even though they're 3-0, but Notre Dame is 0-2, and they're still in the top 25 in the AP and the coaches poll. And it seems like, well, I'm complaining. I'm sure others are complaining, but everyone other than the Notre Dame fans are complaining.
Well, some things just don't go away, right? Before they had the playoffs, people got excluded, right? When it was just voting to see who can be ranked. And it's the same things going on now. You know what I'm saying? Although Notre Dame is a blue blood of college sports. So, they're going to keep them in there as long as they can.
But Nebraska is also one of those teams, and Nebraska is 3-0. They're not even ranked. So it's just one of those things. It goes back somewhat to me also saying these teams don't need to be ranked like this early in the season. They need to start ranking them after the first month so you will have more of an idea of who's legit, who's not. But I also understand the marketing angle, which I've talked about before on the Sports Bag Bros podcast with Bias. I talked about how it's the marketing angle. Who's going to go see just Notre Dame playing so-and-so and just leave it at that and just leave it up to Notre Dame being Notre Dame and so-and-so being so-and-so. They want to hear #1 Notre Dame going against #2 so-and-so. That's that ego. That's what's going to sell tickets. And that's why they do it. And the last game before, at least that Thursday, that I want to talk about, because like I said, we're going to do this for a half hour. We're going to sprint through this damn thing, and we're going to get through with it. It's UCLA losing to New Mexico. Are you kidding? New Mexico came into California and was able to beat UCLA. I hadn't kept an eye on UCLA to know whether they were going to be a good team or a bad team. But that loss got their old running back from back in the day, star running back, Deshaun Foster, fired. He was the coach there. Just 2 seasons. He was fired. He's now without a job as UCLA lost to New Mexico. Do you remember Deshaun Foster? I think he played with the Carolina Panthers.
I remember Deshaun Foster. Yeah, he had okay. I think with the Colts too, right?
You know what? I thought it was the Carolina Panthers. Maybe he had gone to the Colts. I don't know, so I'm not even going to talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's keep it college, I guess. I know he played better than Skip Hicks. We remember him and Skip Hicks with that running style. But anyways, let's move on from there. I just had to mention that UCLA, even though they're just so nondescript this year, not competitive, you lose your coach. Things are looking terrible over there. Anyway, we move on and talk about now some of the real games that had taken place. Before I do that real quick, let's talk about, just for a split second, Rutgers taking on Norfolk State. And people watching this are wondering, what the hell you're talking about Norfolk State for? They're in the HBCU. No one really gives a damn. First of all, I do give a damn. I like HBCU football and all other sports. But anyways, I mentioned that because Mike Vick is the head coach of Norfolk State. It seems like everybody wants to try to get their coach prime on. people are hiring these coaches and putting them in HBCUs and hoping things happen. A couple of years ago, it was Ed Reed going down to Bethune-Cookman until he left. And we know about Hugh Jackson down in Grambling. And we talked about Eddie George at Tennessee State. And Prime, of course, was at Jackson State. So they're just sprinkling these guys all about. And my man, Leon Washington, the offensive coordinator for Central State in Ohio, now on a 3-game losing streak, but this is his first year. And Tony Carter, former NFL player, Jacksonville, Florida native as well. Watched him play since he was 15 years old. Bro, I go back with these guys and I'm loyal. In fact, they're coming here to Jacksonville in just a couple of weeks. And I'm going to the game. They're playing Ed Waters. So I'll get to see Leon and Tony again. I watched these guys fight with diapers. Now they're playing up there in major college football, even if it's HBCU. So what does that mean? We got to talk about some of the upsets this week. Is it really an upset? Georgia Tech at home beats Clemson. Clemson is 1-2 and not in the national championship talk as we speak. We saw how they pulled it together last year and snuck into the ACC championship game and got themselves an invite because they did win the ACC championship game against SMU. This time around, it doesn't look like that will be the case. First of all, the ACC is a lot stronger now than it was last year. But wow, Clemson looking bad. And I think it really reflects on Dabo Swinney not really taking advantage of the transfer portal like everyone else. He was left behind. He finally got players, but it's only 3. When you have other coaches getting 30 and 40, like Bill Belichick, even though it didn't work for him, Coach Prime got over 80 a couple of years ago when they had that decent season. But too many coaches using going into the transfer portal, making things happen. Dabo Swinney didn't do it. They lose to Georgia Tech. His seat, I don't think it's hot, but it's getting freaking warm.
Yeah, it is. Georgia Tech pulled off a stunner with the Bobby Dodd knocking off, number 12 Clemson 24-21 with that 55-yard get. That was one of the most competitive games for this weekend. That them coming down to the 55-yard field goal as time expired. You know what I mean? And then we saw Haynes King return from an injury, and he led a gutsy final drive. And then the two costly turnovers by Cade sealed it. And now Clemson's playoffs hopes is on life support now.
Yeah, certainly. But luckily they expanded the playoff format this year, so there still may be a small chance. But I think with all the landmines that's going on in the ACC this year, with Florida State being much better than expected, and if they keep this up, they're going to play Clemson. And it looks like even in Death Valley, it doesn't matter. LSU showed you that. It doesn't matter if they're in Death Valley. In fact, they declared them as the fake Death Valley, as LSU says their own Death Valley is the real one. And going by the way things went between those two, LSU is right. They're correct. They have the real Death Valley. They're still undefeated, where Clemson is 1-2. Unbelievable. Cade Klubnik going into the season, they're talking about he's the most valuable or most viable option at quarterback going into next season's draft. I don't think they were talking about number 1 overall, but they were just talking about he's good enough to be a high first-round draft pick. He better be glad if he slips into the second round playing the way he's playing. He has done nothing that I thought he would do. He can still run. He has athleticism. The other things just aren't working for him. So, yes, Georgia Tech, and you said quarterback, he runs the ball well, and he throws a little bit. And I saw last year as a Miami Hurricanes fan what Georgia Tech was able to do to Miami, and Miami didn't have any answer for them last season, trying to stop the run, and things just didn't work out for the Canes. But Georgia Tech better this year, throwing the ball and running the ball, and the defense is pretty damn good, which is pretty much they're steady defensively most of the time anyway. But anyway, moving on to other games that were played. How about South Carolina and Vanderbilt? This ain't your daddy's Vanderbilt anymore. They're not the doormat. They've always been in the SEC and college football as a whole. It all started pretty much last year. And even before the big, huge, dynamic upset of the Alabama Crimson Tide in Tuscaloosa, they beat Virginia Tech last season in Nashville. And I remember that game because when I saw the line, I said, you know what? I'm taking Virginia Tech. At the time, I didn't know Diego Pavia had transferred to Vandy. When I saw that he transferred, I switched it up. I said, I'm taking Vandy. And they ended up winning the damn game. And Diego Pavia, he's the difference. He's absolutely the difference on the team. The attitude he has, the fire that he has. If you watched him at New Mexico State, if you ever had an opportunity a little bit, even on clips, you say, damn, he does these little funky things. He's like Doug Flutie, like on the West Coast at bad schools. But now he's in the SEC. Now everyone can see what he does. He's not going to be that elite NFL quarterback, but he's going to get an opportunity because he has that Flutie magic, even though he has that
right, Flutie magic.
He has Diego Pavia look. But either way, they go to and beat South Carolina. They knock out Lenoris Sellers, the quarterback for the Gamecocks, knock him out. The backup comes in, doesn't make much of a difference. I think the final score was 31-7. So for people who are watching, bro, I didn't edit this, and I'm not going to edit it. I'm black, I'm lazy, so I'm not doing it. So what's going to happen? I'm just going to do the show straight damn through off the top of my damn head. So if I can't remember scores, you know what the damn score was. We're going into week 4 soon. Don't worry about
that. You had it right, 31-7.
All right. So then another one of the games we need to bring up, one of the more important games going into it, at least, being a Canes fan myself for all of these years, South Florida walked into Coral Gables looking to continue their upset streak. They started the season off beating number 25, Boise State. It seemed like a surprise at the time, but Boise State didn't have Ashton Jeanty anymore, who's with the Las Vegas Raiders and having his own problems right now on the ground. But nevertheless, they beat Boise State, and they beat them well when no one thought they would. And then the following week, they go to the Swamp, which was last week, and they beat the Gators in the Swamp at the last second as Nico Gramatica kicked a 19-yard field goal. Wow. And I think that was the reason why they didn't beat Miami, because if it were the first game of the season, they would have had that element of surprise. But because Miami and other fans had seen them upset Boise State and then the Florida Gators in the Swamp, there was no boo factor to it. So when they came to Miami, Miami absolutely dominated them on the offensive line.
Yeah, they wasn't taking no chances.
No chances. They jumped on him, even though Carson Beck put up nice numbers in terms of yards. He did throw 2 interceptions. One of those interceptions wasn't necessarily his fault, but his stigma for throwing interceptions, his penchant for throwing interceptions is still a little bothersome. And I know they keep saying the same things over and over. He only lost 3 games when he was at Georgia, but guess what? There were some of those games, if you watched him, he looked worse in wins than he did in losses. It's just one of those things. You have to have context. You just can't look at the scoreboard. You just can't look at the stat sheet. But nevertheless, he did what he needed to do because Mark Fletcher was on fire, averaging over 7 yards per rush, running that rock very hard. And Shamar Brown, the transfer from North Dakota State, man, you're talking about a huge surprise. He could run that route too. Didn't have his best day, but it was a Mark Fletcher show. That's what helped the Canes continue to grind that team down and was able to kick him out of there and win the game. Mark Fletcher, 6.5 yards per carry for the season so far. Now he's sharing the backfield, but he's starting to step out a little bit. I remember another time when the Canes did a lot of the same, when they had Frank Gore, they had Clinton Portis, they had Willis McGahee. You had to figure out a way to get people the ball. You had to find a way to make someone happy. Clinton Portis eventually became the odd man out. Frank Gore got hurt. And then you ended up having Willis McGahee having a hell of a year of his own, but blew out his knee in the Fiesta Bowl. So, yeah, I'm going through it. All right, I'm going through it. Just don't mind me. I'm doing it off the top of my head. I'm looking at some scores, but this is all organic, man, to tell you the truth. Now, how about Alabama beating Wisconsin? I know some people want to be able to say, they're back. They're back. I don't know if they're back just yet. I need to see more because it could be a matter of Wisconsin is bad. They're bad. And the way Alabama beat them, it looks like they might have been that bad.
Yeah, Ty Simpson threw for 382 yards and 4 TDs. And Ryan Williams lit up the Badgers with the 165 yards and 2 scores. So, Alabama had a day. So how they go is that the Wisconsin got some issues on defense. So maybe like Alabama's just dominant Alabama.
Well, I look at that and see if this is the traditional Alabama team that we've come to love because of Nick Saban's signature. And it kind of doesn't look like that right now. Well, it actually doesn't. I'm not going to say kind of, sort of. It just simply doesn't because they can't run the ball. They had about 72 yards rushing. That's not Alabama football. They don't necessarily rely on that passing game like that, even with a receiver like Ryan Williams. Even when they had Tua, they still were able to run the football, but they also threw the football. That's why they were so dominant and won a national championship. But there's still, I think people want to say or want to hang on to what Bama used to be. Bama fans, especially, even with Nick Saban gone, some people are basking that Nick Saban is gone. They're basking in Alabama's alleged misery, even though it's only one loss so far, and that's against a Florida State team who may turn out to be a whole lot better this season as it goes on. I'm not even going to include that East Texas A&M game where they just threw up a 70 spot and just called it a day, But it's going to be a better Florida State team. Yeah, but Alabama, Ryan Williams coming back from the concussion that he had from the previous week puts up phenomenal numbers like he should have. But Wisconsin has their own problems, and we'll see how their season turns out. I think they may be at the bottom of the Big Ten by the time the season's over. Even if it's mid-tier, they're gonna have some issues. This isn't the Wisconsin that we had gotten used to, at least over the past 10 years. They just can't seem to do anything. So yeah, just had to give Alabama their shout out. We had to give them their shout out because we had to give Georgia and Tennessee a look at what they had done this past weekend. Georgia goes to Nashville or Knoxville, and if they went to Nashville, they might lose that game to Vanderbilt. But they went to Knoxville. They played Tennessee. They played the Volunteers, and they were down 21-7 in the first quarter. And I remember I was receiving text messages. I was getting a whole bunch of text messages gloating in the first quarter of college football. Are you crazy? When Georgia's been as dominant as they have been against Tennessee over all these years, I think they won 8 of the last 9 or something like that going into this game. And I'm getting messages like this in the first quarter from Gator fans. I'm not going to mention Kerry's name. Come on, man. He was sending messages. Look at that. They're getting the snot beat out of him because he's a big Gator fan. So anytime Georgia loses, these Gator fans just love it. And then the Bulldogs do what the Bulldogs do. They just put us comeback. The defense isn't what it once was when they had all those players going into the draft in the first round, but they're still Georgia. They still have 5-star players backing up 5-star players. And so, it's just a matter of maturation and getting coached up, and they'll be their old defensive selves by the middle of the season. College football, as we've said before, they don't have preseasons. So things have to work themselves out throughout the course of the year or throughout the course of the first month, in my opinion. And I think that's why back in the day, you would see a whole bunch of soft teams, these teams playing soft teams because they tried to get their team together. But now there's so much at stake in terms of seeding and so forth. Now the bigger games are happening so early on. That's how we end up getting a Texas versus Ohio State game. But Georgia was able to really put the pound town on them. And Tennessee loses again to Georgia. Josh Heupel, you can't find a way to win. 44-1 is what Tennessee lost by against Georgia. Let me just throw a little stat in there. Joey Aguilar, let's give that guy credit. Even though he did throw the 2 picks, he did throw the 4 touchdowns. He kept them in the game, 371 yards total. But Georgia just has the better team. I thought that Georgia had the better team anyway. And it took a little bit of extra, a little more doing, and that's ended up being what it was. They, they were able to get it at the end of the game, or near the end of the game. It wasn't a huge margin. It wasn't a blowout. I wasn't expecting a blowout, but I thought maybe a 14-point victory might be the case. But it's so difficult winning in the SEC. And I was talking to someone during the game, and he told me, man, you don't understand how hard it is to win in the SEC on the road. And I believe him. I've been to several SEC games, and they're all road games to me because neither one of them are my team. But I've seen those cathedrals dedicated to the football players. That's what they call them down here in the South. They're cathedrals dedicated to football players. And you go on the field and you look in the stands and you're like, what the hell? You see it on TV all the time, but you just can't get it until you're out there, either in the stands or on the field if you have the benefit of getting on the field. I remember I was at Florida State playing Maryland. I forgot which year it was. It might have been 2005, 2006, somewhere around there. And I was on the field. It must have been 2005 because Lorenzo Booker was there. And I was on the field, and the crowd started screaming because it was like a 4th down play, and the ground was shaking. Home field advantage was shaking. You thought something was going to come out of the ground. But anyway, and that was an ACC game. So let alone these big cavernous stadiums they have in the SEC or even up north. The Midwest, you have big stadiums, but I don't think they're that loud. I know Ohio State fans are going to like to hear that. Michigan fans might not like to hear that either. Penn State fans.
Yeah.
Huge stadium. Notre Dame, we already know that they're loud. But they're front running, so they're loud for whatever reason. And by the way, since we're going to mention Notre Dame, we might as well talk about the L they caught this past weekend. They lost to Texas A&M at the last second. What's going on here? That 0-2 Notre Dame team I started off complaining about being in the top 25 coaches and AP poll, those guys were upset at home, their first home game. I don't know. I know this isn't the same Notre Dame as last year. Of course, Riley Leonard isn't there. There's a big difference. There's a true freshman there. That's the difference.
Oh.
That air isn't a good thing on a radio broadcast.
Not my fault. Yeah, they lost. The dudes lost the close one. Yeah, the dudes lost the close one. They they just couldn't handle it. Marcel Reed, he had a good day. 360 yards, 2 Ds, 21.2 yards per completion. They couldn't do nothing with that. Notre Dame's defense gave up 488 total yards, including multiple explosive plays. And they only forced one turnover. So, with that being said, that is not a formula for winning.
It's not a formula for winning, and they don't have a running game that they can rely on like they did last year. Going into this season, just like Ryan Williams from Alabama and Jeremiah Smith from Ohio State were coming into the season with everybody expecting a whole lot more because they were so phenomenal and they're so highly talented. We were expecting the same thing from Jeremiah Love because the offensive line at Notre Dame was supposed to be one of the best in the country, and they still may just be. Maybe Texas A&M is really that good. But what ended up happening is when they played Miami, Miami's front eight shook them up on defense and offense. Miami dominated both sides of the line. They just got a little mediocre towards the end. It made the game closer than it should have been, but they still got it nonetheless. And then they still have that freshman quarterback, was it CJ Carr. So last week at Notre Dame, in the confines of familiarity, their home stadium, I thought they would be able to pull it off. But once again, I think it may be a case of Texas A&M actually being that good, not Notre Dame being that bad, but still not enough to keep them in the top 25 in both the AP and coaches poll at 0-2, when there were other 3-0 teams, Nebraska and North Carolina State, as I said, those guys aren't in there. But either way, and then, of course, we could talk about Florida losing to LSU. Is it a big deal? Not necessarily in terms of the grand scheme of thing of who's going where later on in the season, but it's a big deal because Billy Napier is probably going to be out of a job before the season ends, and I think it's all contingent on this weekend's game between the Gators and the Miami Hurricanes down in Coral Gables. I think a blowout leaves him on the soup line. Not necessarily the soup line. He's still going to have a whole bunch of money and a buyout, but he's going to be unemployed. And I don't know how long he'll be unemployed if they would get blown out, in my opinion, against the Canes. An interstate game against the Canes. They were beaten badly last season. This year, Miami is even better in the trenches. I think Mark Fletcher is going to have a field day against them.
Yeah. LSU's defense stole the show. DJ Lagway got intercepted 5 times. You know what I'm saying? Garrett Nussmeier, he was solid. You know what I'm saying? 222 yards, 1 TD, and only 1 interception. So now with that, the Tigers are 3-0, and the Heisman hype train is in Louisiana right now for Nussmeier.
Yeah, for Gus Nussmeier. I mean, Garrett Nussmeier, he's going to Gus. I remember watching his father. Not even watching his father. I knew about his father. His father, Doug Nussmeier, played for Idaho back in the day when they were Division II or Division I AA. So I was always rocking with him. In fact, I thought he would have unseated Jaden Daniels a couple of years ago because I was like, Jaden Daniels isn't for real. He's going to unseat him in the middle of the season. Well, a Heisman Trophy later, a number 2 overall pick in the NFL later, a Rookie of the Year later. I was wrong. Hey, that happens. That's pro football. I was talking about college. It didn't work out there either. So, yeah, DJ Lagway threw 5 interceptions in that game. You can't win like that. So I'll end it with all of this because we're coming up with that half-hour mark. DJ Lagway was the player of the year in the state of Texas. I think it's a matter of him still getting acclimated to this season because he was out for the spring because of injury, and then he was out for the portion of the fall with another injury. Seems like he's injury prone. Was injured again in Georgia last year. Wow, things aren't looking good, but he's going to have his opportunity against the Canes. And with the way the Canes do thing and do business, coming after him with Ruben Bain, who had a phenomenal game, there's a lot to be said on Sunday down in Coral Gables. I'm Trav. He's Dimeskii. Yes, in the college football review with you.
With you.
We'll see you next time in week 4. Until then, later.